There are only 6 verses in Psalm 23, just 118 words, and yet, for more than 3,000 years, these words have been whispered at hospital bedsides, recited at graves, memorized by children, and clung to in moments of unspeakable fear. It has been called perhaps the most famous piece of literature in the world. But what if we've been reading it too safely? What if Psalm 23 was never meant to be admired from a distance, but claimed? Today on the Bible Deep Dive, we're going to explore how one man, Charles Spurgeon, changed the way generations understood this psalm, not by adding to it, but by drawing attention to one small word that changes everything. Charles Spurgeon was one of the most influential Christian voices of the 19th century. By his early 20s, he was preaching to crowds of thousands in London. Over his lifetime, he delivered more than 3,500 sermons, wrote dozens of books, and reached millions long before microphones or live streams ever existed. He became known as the Prince of Preachers, but among all his writings, one work stands above the rest. A massive multi-volume commentary on the Psalms called the Treasury of David. And buried within that work is what many consider the most influential interpretation ever written on Psalm 23. Spurgeon didn't just explain the psalm, he reframed it. Psalm 23 is often treated like a spiritual lullaby: green pastures, still waters, a gentle shepherd, comforting, beautiful, safe. But Spurgeon warned that when we read it only that way, we miss its true power. The psalm is not merely poetic reassurance. It is a declaration of relationship, a covenant claim, a statement about who God is, and more importantly, who he is to you. Spurgeon argued that Psalm 23 was never meant to be read impersonally, as if describing a shepherd who exists somewhere. It was written to be spoken boldly, personally, and decisively. Spurgeon famously called Psalm 23 the Pearl of the Psalms, not because it was decorative, but because it was costly, formed through pressure, and meant to be treasured. And at the heart of that pearl, Spurgeon identified something revolutionary: a single word, a word so small we often pass over it without noticing. Spurgeon wrote that the entire strength of Psalm 23 rests on one word: my. The Lord is my shepherd, not a shepherd, not the shepherd in general, but my shepherd. Spurgeon insisted that without that personal claim, the psalm loses its force. Without ownership, the promises remain beautiful but powerless, because comfort, provision, guidance, and protection are not abstract ideas. They belong only to those who can say, "He is mine and I am his." Psalm 23 does not ask whether God is capable of shepherding. It asks whether you will trust him to shepherd you. But Spurgeon didn't stop there. He noticed something most readers overlook. Psalm 23 doesn't stand alone. It follows Psalm 22, a psalm of suffering, abandonment, pierced hands and feet, a psalm Christians have long recognized as pointing directly to the cross. Spurgeon's insight was simple and devastatingly profound. You cannot truly know the shepherd of Psalm 23 until you know the sufferer of Psalm 22. The green pastures of Psalm 23 grow in the shadow of the cross. The safety of the sheep was secured by the suffering of the shepherd. The comfort we cherish was purchased at an immeasurable cost. That's why Spurgeon's interpretation still matters, because Psalm 23 is not about poetic imagery. It's about relationship. It's about trust. It's about whether faith remains theoretical or becomes personal. Spurgeon taught generations that Scripture doesn't transform us when we admire it, but when we claim it. Spurgeon's legacy can be summed up simply: his commentary remains foundational for serious study of Psalm 23. His title, The Pearl of the Psalms, has endured for more than a century. And his greatest contribution was this: he taught us that the power of Psalm 23 is not found in its poetry, but in its pronoun. So the next time you hear these words, the Lord is my shepherd, pause. Ask yourself, is this something I admire or something I claim? If this deep dive helped you see Psalm 23 in a new way, consider subscribing to the Bible Deep Dive, because sometimes the most familiar verses hold the most overlooked truths.